Hey everybody, JJ here. Just in the studio talking about a couple albums here and there, and messing around thinking about drums and stuff like that. And um, I don't know where exactly it's kind of this particular drummer has come back into kind of like my circle, and like I often have that where I'm inspired by somebody and kind of go off on a tangent with this drummer and this band for an intense focus on them, let's call it, and then kind of I get distracted and I'm on to the next thing, and just music is my favorite pastime, and I spend quite a bit of time just doing that, just listening and taking it all in, and so I have a lot of drummers in bands that'll come and go in my life, and they're here for a while, gone, and then they come back, and I find them at different times, and sometimes I just find them at what seems to be the kind of right time. And as a drummer, I think everybody kind of like you're pursuing something, and then any musician, I should say, like you're pursuing something and then maybe you're just not inspired, and it's kind of like a roadblock, and then revisiting things from your past or something like that can be like a real great way to kind of break the monotony, or kind of ease out of something that's very frustrating or whatever. And so for the last while I've been kind of challenging myself to learn new material, and it was it's always frustrating to learn new material, but going back through, and sometimes I just don't feel like doing it, and so it's a great joy to come back around to songs and bands I'm familiar with, and instead of technically challenging songs, sometimes it's nice just to play drums and have fun again. And a drummer that to me epitomizes that whole idea, drums being fun, is Tommy Lee. And I could go. I mentioned Tommy Lee quite a bit in a video I did about the Shout at the Devil album from Motley Crue. That's an album that I heard very, very early on, like in my life. It came out a couple years after I was born, and my older brothers had it, and listened to it quite a bit, and I was enamored with that album, and still am to this day. It's an album I revisit quite a bit in my listening. And Tommy Lee is obviously the drummer in Motley Crue. I don't think he needs any introduction if you yourself are a drummer, but he's fairly famous for other things outside of just being a drummer anyways. And part of me wonders if somehow that kind of takes away from his contribution to drumming overall, because this might be controversial and it's just my opinion, and I am entitled to it. I think Tommy Lee is the John Bonham of the 1980s. And, what does that even mean? John Bonham clearly had an impact in rock and roll, and, he was a solid player, technical chops. He had, stage presence. He had just this larger than life persona. They used to call him whatever, the Man Mountain or Behind the Drums or whatever, tags they gave him. And his importance in Led Zeppelin's structure and what he contributed to the music cemented his place as almost kind of like an irreplaceable element in the band. And Led Zeppelin, obviously kind of held true to that. It never replaced him officially. After John Bonham died, that was kind of, a wrap on Led Zeppelin for the most part. It was never going to be the same. And even though Tommy Lee has been replaced a few times in Motley Crue over the years, some great drummers stepped in and filled his place at the times Tommy's left. Randy Castillo in the 90s came in and played, and then Samantha Maloney, who's another great drummer, she came in, and I think Will Hunt was another guy that may have played a Motley Crue, but I don't know if it was an official capacity or not. He may have just stepped in for shows or something. But I think if you think of Tommy Lee, or if you think of Motley Crue, I don't think you think of any of those other drummers. Yeah, I don't. I can't imagine anyone does. I think Tommy Lee is at the end of the day, the whole personality behind the band, the whole kind of like ethos behind the band, all of the antics, all of the, the kind of, I hate to call it childish, but just like this childish kind of like enthusiasm. A lot of that is Tommy. I think that's Tommy's personality. He was one of the most outspoken members of the band, good looking guy. And, he's like epitomized kind of like the rock drummers. Everybody, I think, in the 80s was trying to like kind of emulate Tommy. Tommy was very early in, to the game with Motley Crue and one of the very first bands on the Sunset Strip. And to say that all those bands and all those drummers weren't taking a page out of Tommy Lee's book when it came to playing and showmanship and all this kind of stuff, I think that takes away from Tommy's impact and his influence in that particular era. His drum solos alone, outside of a handful of drummers, like there's, Travis Barker, there's, Joey Jordison, like there was a few kind of modern drummers, that were, making the drum solo. And in the same era as Tommy was playing, like Eric Carr, a few other drummers as well. They were making these showcase drum solos. And I don't think that anybody ever did it, the show of the drum solo, better than Tommy. I mean, like, go ahead and argue with me in the comments. Like, if you know somebody better or somebody that had a more spectacular drum solo, not in the technique and the particularly like the chops or anything like that. I've never been a real proponent that drum solos that are technically advanced go over that well if you're playing, in an arena. There's all kinds of drummers that play arenas, and first thing they mention is that any kind of like buzz rolls or technical things all get lost in just the cavernous nature of the venue that they're playing. And so taking the drum solo idea and making it more of a show, Kiss did it in the 70s with the drum riser and the smoke and all this kind of stuff. And Tommy at, Motley Crue's heyday was able to take those ideas and just like, blow them up. There was, a matter of timing with how big Motley Crue had gotten with like the Theater of Pain album. And that drum solo, I think he was doing it on that tour where it had the rotating cage. It could have been the tour after that for the Girls, Girls, Girls album. But anyways, in and amongst that time, that drum solo with the spinning drum riser and him hanging from it and just like everybody wanted to be Tommy that was a drummer at that point. Like that was as cool as it got. And he carried that all the way out, so you have your trajectory, shout, and then you get theater and Theater of Pain, and then Girls, 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 and then you get to Dr. Feelgood, and Motley Crue is at the heights at that point. Like, it doesn't get any bigger in rock and roll than what they got to then and there. And his drum solo during that tour was really cool, where he was going out over the crowd, and he had all these amazing elements of that. And so when I compare him to John Bonham, I'm not comparing technical prowess. Tommy Lee does have that. Clearly, he's a phenomenal drummer, and he has a feel. And I think that's where I really equate John Bonham and Tommy Lee. John Bonham was Tommy Lee's favorite drummer. And myself, I can speak for myself, because I know when you have somebody that you idolize that much, you kind of like take in a lot of different things from them. And to me, that would have been with Lars from Metallica. And when you study somebody and somebody's drumming and the music that intensely, kind of, you can really kind of adopt more than just being able to play the song, but the minutia of it, like the feel and the timing and the accents and all these things. And I think Tommy was a massive understudy of John Bonham and carried that torch of that, where it just like, it played for the song, showcased his talents and his chops here and there where he could, but just played and had a great feel. And in rock and roll, I mean, that's the high water mark. I mean, guys like Phil Rudd and all these other drummers that had such a great feel, and Tommy Lee is one of those guys. Regardless of what you think about his personality, or his shenanigans or his antics or anything like that, that guy is a amazing drummer when it comes to playing rock and roll. And I'm going to hold that opinion until the day I die. And I might not stand on a hill and fight for it, but I'm definitely going to have that opinion. So, but yeah, like, even getting into his antics, to me, it's Tommy's kind of not a victim. I mean, he's obviously done these things for himself, but he was kind of it was almost like an overexposure thing in a way. And it's just, you either love him or hate him. And there's parts of Tommy's personality and things like that I find really endearing. I think he's super genuine when it comes to loving music and all this kind of stuff. But there's just, it was a case of overexposure, and the time for me during that was really the Motley Crue put out the self-titled album. I think that was in 1994, and then I love that album. That's an amazing album, and possibly the most cavernous drum sound of all time on that album. Severely underrated in my opinion, but Vince Neil wasn't there, and it kind of was a dividing point amongst the fans. And but Tommy at that point was in the media constantly with his marriage to Pam Anderson, and that whole the tape and all that kind of stuff. And if you remember those times, it was pretty wild. And I was about 14 or 15 around that time, and Pamela Anderson was the most famous woman on earth, essentially. So it was just a constant. There was so many things that took away from his drumming and his other musical endeavors during that time. And it was like a saturation point that was kind of reached. And I think that kind of turned the tide for what people may have sort of thought about him, just in a musical sense. They kind of I don't want to say people lost respect for him, but maybe they did. I mean, I never did. I always thought his drumming spoke louder than kind of anything he did outside of that. And I never really idolized Tommy for any of the other things, the shenanigans and all that kind of stuff. I get it. It's rock and roll, but it's just it wasn't it wasn't the allure for me. It was all about the music for me. And so when these other things kind of come along, it just it really kind of took away from me, and I think diminished kind of Tommy's reputation in some ways as well. But and then Tommy kind of drifts into these other areas of music, and he was trying things at that time. This is the late '90s, and nu metal is obviously the big thing. Motley Crue is playing to 7 people in a bar somewhere in Idaho. The times have changed, and Tommy is clearly still wanting to play music and go off and do these things. And he's a fully capable songwriter in his own sense. A song like Home Sweet Home is, Tommy, I believe, wrote that on piano, the intro to that song. A very, very capable musician in his own right. And so he released essentially a solo album with the Methods of Mayhem, and get into at that time, it was an interesting thing for me, liking drums. And I was just starting to get into, maybe I had already been to it for a couple years, but electronics and programming. And, I like drummers like Chris Vrenna from Nine Inch Nails. And, I can't think of the guy's name from Ministry. Anyways, there's a lot of bands were, doing programmed drums and electronic elements at that time. And I thought the Methods of Mayhem album was interesting. The first thing I think I heard from that kind of era of Tommy's musical output was Welcome to Planet Boom, which was for, I think the Barbed Wire movie soundtrack or something like that. But, the song was really interesting. And then, but, it it kind of got away from, what I was interested in from him. And so I more or less kind of stopped paying attention. He started doing reality TV shows, and it's just like, it was just, none of that stuff is for me. And so I kind of, didn't really look at him, and I really play that much Motley Crue. And I always, liked the songs when I hear them on the radio and stuff. But there was just something about the turn that he took in his personal, or his his public exposure, that just kind of, it was off-putting for me, and he just kind of shied away from it. And then, as I got older, I kind of stopped caring about perhaps, my influences, and having them be out there and stuff. And so, as I started getting older, as like Tommy's drumming and Motley Crue's music in general started coming back, I started appreciating it for what it was. Even the horrible songs on Theater of Pain, they were, they were a picture in time of that era and stuff like that. And, I kind of grew to appreciate that stuff, for as cheesy as some of it is. And, those guys just put out some amazing albums during that time. And, Dr. Feelgood, I eventually will probably talk about that album in a bit more detail. But, that album is kind of like, leading up to that, I think you have Operation Mindcrime with that drum sound. Scott Rockenfield had a very influential drum sound. And, we had these big kind of drum sounds, and, things were towards the end of the 80s, sounds are getting bigger and production's getting bigger and all this kind of stuff. And by the time you get to Dr. Feelgood in 1989, I mean, it's just the drum sound is that's the catalyst for the Black Album drum sound, which everyone, goes gaga about and talks about being one of the most influential drum sounds ever. It's well, the basis of that drum sound is Dr. Feelgood. And, Tommy always had these incredible kind of drum sounds dating back to even the earlier albums. And when I, was able to kind of read more about the production value and things that went into making those albums, and how they got those drum sounds, using natural methods, like just natural reverbs and, ways to pump things up and stuff like that. And it was, my eyes were kind of opened again to, things he was doing back then, and just innovation that he was kind of introducing. I think I had read somewhere he was one of the early kind of adopters of drum triggering, for the live shows and stuff like that. I could be wrong. Sometimes the Modern Drummer articles, mix themselves up, but I think I had read at one point that he was, one of the early adopters for acoustic drum triggering in a live scenario and all that kind of stuff. And just an incredibly influential guy. And, even with gear and stuff like that, I listened to those albums, and I've mentioned in other videos, I was always a massive fan of Paiste cymbals, and I played another brand for many years and still have them, but my ears were always tuned into cymbal sounds on albums, and I couldn't help but notice that the Motley Crue stuff in particular, it's they always had an amazing, brilliant cymbal sound. And he's another reason Paiste ended up becoming, my kind of go-to favorite drum brand or cymbal brand. And just his influence across drumming for me has just it's crossed kind of different eras of my life. And now being older again, I've seen Tommy and kind of coming back around because Motley Crue's been touring again, and getting introduced to a whole new younger generation of drummers. And I think a lot of people, perhaps younger musicians, they might only know him for the public persona part of him, and the larger than life stuff, and all that kind of stuff. But there's under that surface, there is a excellent musician there, and very underrated in my opinion. And it's, I think people in certain circles really have a lot of respect for him. I think in the general consensus, I think he gets left behind a little bit just because of the public persona and the shenanigans and things. But I mean, hey, Keith Moon was a wild man too, right? and he doesn't suffer from the same consequences as Tommy has in some ways. But yeah, the influence that Tommy had on me through the years is just, just such a solid drummer. The cymbal catches that he does, especially on the like the first they showed at the Devil, there's he does these things in like Too Young to Fall in Love, where he does these off accent or like these offbeat cymbal catches that they don't have a bass drum note or an accent underneath them. They're literally just a cymbal hit and a catch. And the timing of those is like, it's very like you need to be accurate with even where the grab is in order to have the note sustain the correct length. And whether he was going that kind of in depth with those things or not, whether it was a feel thing or what it was, I don't even know. Maybe he got those from John Bonham. I don't even know. But I know I definitely stole those from Tommy Lee, and I love incorporating those kind of accents into things, and the low tuning of drums and the large drum sets. It's just like there's a lot of, it might not be apparent on the surface, but there's a lot of Tommy Lee's influence in my playing, and it's no coincidence that I basically kind of sat down and learned pretty much the entire early catalog of Motley Crue from Too Fast for Love all the way through to basically like the everything pre-Generation Swine, let's say. That's where my cutoff point is, and it might be everybody's kind of cutoff point. I don't know. Maybe there's some. If you like Generation Swine, let me know. I'd love to hear some thoughts about that album. But yeah, the influence of Tommy is very widespread in my drumming, and I want to give that guy the recognizance I think he deserves and the respect that he deserves, and. To reiterate, I think it gets overshadowed by his big personality and some of the public ongoings, and I hate to see that. I want that guy to get recognized for what he is and what he's always been, an amazing drummer and an amazing musician. So if by any chance you haven't checked out any drumming or anything from Motley Crue, or maybe haven't listened for a while and need a refresh, I mean, you can't go wrong with Dr. Feelgood. That album, amazing stuff on there. I just did a cover of a song from that not that long ago, and anything off Shout at the Devil. That is a highly influential album, and for a lot of bands, not just myself, like that. That album came out at the right time to influence basically almost an entire music genre and a scene. Like the Sunset Strip wouldn't be the Sunset Strip if it wasn't for Motley Crue and Shout at the Devil. So kudos to those guys. It's hard to be, an innovator and things like that. And Tommy managed to find his way, and like I said, become, the John Bonham of the 80s. And I'll stay with that sentiment till I'm 80, let's say. But check out Tommy, check out Motley Crue. I hope I didn't gush too much about him, but I got a lot of respect for that guy, and I hope he, in the grand scheme of things, I hope as things move on and time moves on and stuff like that, I hope that he's held in the same regard as like our Mount Rushmore of drummers in rock and roll. So, cheers to Tommy. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.